It's Wednesday here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo. We're going to talk about Cam Heyward's new deal and how it helps the Steelers moving forward. 3 years for a guy that's 35 years old. Some people think that might be crazy. Are they? We'll talk about that here on the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as future deals for Pat Freiermuth and what else the Steelers need to be getting ready for in Week 1 against the Atlanta Falcons. It's the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo, and we are, as always, brought to you here on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, the news happened last night. Cam Heyward is extended. He signed a 3-year extension, $45 million in new money, $16 million of that guaranteed. And as our partner, Jerry Dulac, reports, opens about $9 million in cap space for this season right now for the Steelers. Ray, you and I kind of talked about this briefly before, but we were wondering, hey, would this happen? Would this move be made? Because he is older. He is coming off a season where he was injured. But Cam Heyward did play ball. Like he can't. Although he skipped the early part of OTAs, he finished OTAs with the Steelers, did mini camp, did training camp, did preseason, and now he's getting paid. What do you think led to the Steelers making this call?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it was Cam's call. I think Cam, despite what he said in the spring at OTAs, he wants to be a Steeler for life. And I think this new contract gives him the opportunity. If you look at the way that it's structured, Chris, he was going to make $16 million in salary this year before the deal was done. He's still making $16 million in salary, but it's just in the form of a $15 million signing bonus and $1 million in base pay. And, for the Steelers, they can still sit back and watch and see how Cam does this year. There is zero money guaranteed beyond the 2024 season. So, I know it was reported by national people as a new 3-year deal, I guess. But, the Steelers are going to go to year with Cam after this year. And, we'll see how it goes. If he plays well, then great. They can revisit it. If not, they can walk away with it with no harm.
And I think that's the thing here is that the Steelers keep their leverage, but Cam Heyward does get a chance to kind of keep playing, get his money. I do wonder if Cam Heyward had hit the open market, what kind of a deal would he have gotten in the NFL? And I guess part of that would also have depended, how well he would have played this season. And that might also be the gamble here, right, Ray? Because let's say Cam goes off and gets, 8 or more sacks this season. Everyone's looking at him like, wow, they got him at a bargain.
Yeah, to answer your question, there's no way of knowing until we see how he plays in 2024. But you're right. If Cam Heyward goes out and gets double-digit sacks again, and he's really good against the run, then the Steelers have him under contract at a fairly reasonable rate. $14.5 million isn't chump change, but there are really good defensive linemen in the NFL who are making around that or, a little bit more for interior linemen. So, I think in the end, Cam didn't want to play anywhere else. There are a few Steelers who can sort of dictate that, right? Ben Roethlisberger was able to say, okay, I don't want to play for another team. I want to walk away and be one of those guys. Joe Green. Some of the greats like Franco Harris were not afforded that opportunity. I think – Dan Rooney was sensitive to this, and I think Dan passed that down to Art. They don't want those types of things to happen in future generations. So they kind of learned their lesson from Franco. Sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes guys want to keep playing even when the Steelers think they're done. But, it seems like right now it's going to work out both in the Steelers' favor and in Cam's favor. He wanted to remain in Pittsburgh, and I think he's going to be afforded that opportunity.
I think it's certainly, you certainly is afforded that opportunity. I also wonder that, Ray, as far as the long-term implications of this, because like there's obviously on-field things, what he brings to the table, will he be healthy this year? But to me, part of this is also looking at this and makes me wonder, can the Steelers show this as an example of like, hey, if you don't hold out, if you don't skip out on these things, if you do show up and play ball and you do all the right things, this is what you get. And as far as working with the front office, because they will give you a deal, because Steelers can point to past things like Le'Veon Bell when he kind of played hardball and it didn't work out for him. On the flip side, you can say, look at Cam Heyward. He didn't not show up. He didn't pout. He came in, did the work behind the scenes. The job got done, and by the end of his career, Cam Heyward's going to have made a lot of money playing for the Steelers.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a unique situation, Chris. I think with younger guys who are definitely going to keep playing, beyond this season, I think it's a different story. Let's say, we're talking about a 28-year-old who's entering his prime. He would not settle for no guaranteed money beyond the current season.
Exact deal, no, he wouldn't. This exact deal would not work for everybody. But I do think it shows like, hey, look at Cam Heyward getting paid at 35 years old.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, hold-ins have been a problem around the NFL. I mean, Brandon Ayuk pretty much forced the 49ers to give him what he wanted, or he was going to force a trade out, right?
Jamar Chase might not play week 1 for the Bengals this week.
Yeah, and Deontay Johnson did it. TJ Watt did it. I'm trying to think who else. Well, Minka didn't do it because he was done in June. But, yeah, others have held in and got what they wanted. So I think we all know the owners got the better of the players, in the CBA that was last negotiated. But, agents and players have found this loophole. And in certain instances, you got to be a great player, you got to have leverage. But definitely in certain instances, Chris, this can work in the player's favor for sure.
Absolutely. I want to talk about one of those young players that I think is in the position to negotiate with the Steelers right now, and that's Pat Freiermuth. Will his extension be coming soon? We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, Cam Heyward's deal is done, but now there's still everyone looking at a few other extensions that might happen. I think everyone can kind of push past Najee Harris. That one seems more obvious, like it's not going to happen. They'll see what happens at the end of the season. Most likely they probably go get another running back. But Pat Freiermuth was one that I thought would be a little bit more easy to make happen, simply because the tight end position is not an expensive position. He has not been he has not put up the numbers of a supreme tight end like the guys like Travis Kelce or George Kittle or TJ Hawkins, and the guys that make the big bucks at tight end. So I thought there'd be a pretty safe middle ground for both to come to, like, hey, there's a lot of potential. It's recognized. You weren't in a great situation, but at the same time, not going to overpay for you at this point. Do you think that a deal does get done this week, or is this something that might be a little bit harder for both of these two sides to land on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Steelers want to get one done, and I think Pat Freiermuth wants to get one done. And when you have both parties working together, then I tend to think that it is going to happen. But, Chris, these negotiations are tricky sometimes, and you hit on a couple of the points that are issues with Pat Freiermuth. Number one, he hasn't produced like a big-time tight end. Now, the Steelers believe he is one, but the numbers, because of offensive coordinators, because of playing with 3 different quarterbacks in 3 years, even 4, 5, if you want to count them, it's been an issue. And number two, Pat has had some issues with concussions, and he had a soft tissue injury last year. I think it was a hamstring that kept him out for 4 or 5 games. So, he has that working against him. That's why I don't think he's going to get, great money in this deal. But I think we talked about it earlier in the week. I think, 12 or 13 million a year. I think that's fair. for Pat Freiermuth. If he does ball out this year and put up the numbers that we all think he can in this offense, then I think it's well worth it too. So I think it's going to come down somewhere in that ballpark. And, we'll see if it happens before Saturday. But as I sit here right now, I do think it's likely to get done.
And you've seen some of these negotiations go down to the wire. TJ Watt took a lot of time, and that's TJ Watt, the guy that's the defensive player of the year and everything like that. Yeah. I know back in the day, Troy Polamalu had an extension that literally got signed while he was getting on the plane to go to week one. So it is a real deadline that the Steelers seem to impose on their players to get it done before week one kicks off, unless you're a quarterback. But I also think part of what Pat Freiermuth's also done things the right way. He's been a positive person. He's been a team player. He hasn't been a guy who's blown up about the problems on offense, because we've seen other guys like George Pickens say, throw me the bleeping ball. I don't think you've ever seen that from Pat Freiermuth. And if anything, we've seen the training camp practices, Ray, we've seen Pat kind of be one of those enthusiastic guys, the guys that shows up, the guy that's motivating others. And I think, like, if you're the Steelers and you have a young offense and you have to pick guys that are on this young offense to carry forward with you, Pat Freiermuth makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, he really does. I think he's built for this offense too, and not only because Arthur Smith loves to use tight ends. You were at training camp, Chris. 2 tight end, 3 tight end formations. I don't want to say it's going to be the norm, but we're going to see it quite a bit. And number 2, the Steelers receiving room it still sort of feels unfinished to me, and I think because of that. Because of Van Jefferson being more like a 3 than a 2, and you bump it down, Calvin Austin being more like a 4 than a 3, and so on and so forth. It just makes sense that Pat Freiermuth would get the second most targets on this team behind George Pickens, likely the second most yardage, and likely the second most catches, because he's just shaping up as the second best receiving option for this team. So you're right, he's done everything the right way. And as I said, usually when that happens and you have 2 willing parties, you're able to meet in the middle. So we'll see where this goes later in the week. One other guy that I always remember, I remember Troy Polamalu signing before he got on the plane. Cortez Allen happened like at 10 o'clock at night. I was on a Saturday. I was at a party and I look at my phone and Cortez Allen signs. I'm like, oh man, I got to go home and write a story now. So they do tend to take it up to the deadline. So don't be surprised if it doesn't happen Wednesday or Thursday. There's still time to do it on Friday and Saturday as well.
No, I definitely agree there. I wonder how this will play out as far as like what kind of money that he does get, because again, like the top guys in the league, they make 17, 16, $15 million a year. The Steelers just cleared out a good amount of cap space with Cam Heyward's contract, and I do wonder if that plays into how they could pay Pat Freiermuth, or if that's setting up something else. Because as we've talked about, we would not, just because they didn't make the trade for Brandon Ayuk or make a trade, before the season opener, or even that Mike Tomlin says, quote unquote, he's comfortable with the Steelers wide receiver situation. That does not mean I would rule out a move happening with this team, with trying to add some sort of talent to this roster, and maybe to some of the more obvious positions like wide receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to remember, Chris, Omar Khan loves to wheel and deal. And he showed a couple of years ago that he could do it at the trade deadline too. And, they got to pick back in exchange for a player. But listen, if they're in a situation this year where they need a player to help them get to the playoffs and they have to flip a pick, then, I think we all know that Omar would be willing to do that. So they have the cap space to do something in the short term, but hey, listen, they could do that in November as well once the trade deadline does get here.
No, that's absolutely part of the question there. I want to talk to you about some of the things Mike Tomlin also said about the offensive line, because it seemed like he was kind of moving, kind of being kind of all over the place, not all over the place, but he would not kind of nail down the image of like, hey, this is what they're going to look like this year when everything's all said and done. I want to talk about that with you, Ray, here in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Savina's Kane and Gallucci. They are your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. That's Savina's Kane and Gallucci. Calls them now for a free consultation today. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda. You go to them at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or visit their website, moonhonda.com, to see all the deals on the new Hondas on the lot. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, car and driver's most awarded brand in 10 best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, Mike Tomlin acknowledged the offensive line several times in his Tuesday press conference. And in doing so, he talked about, the potential of getting a Troy Fautanu back, and he seemed optimistic about that, and that's a good thing. But he also kind of acknowledged that, like, the Steelers might not know who their starting offensive linemen are until they get to see how Troy looks this week, which is interesting because – they've been really solidified about who their offensive line would be all summer. You look at Broderick Jones, how he hasn't played well in the preseason. He's been dealing with injury. Troy Fautanu has been dealing with injury. Isaac Seumalo is now hurt, and with Spencer Anderson, filling in for him at left guard. Now, granted, as Mike Tomlin said, Seumalo's injury not nearly as bad as thought. It's even more of a week-to-week situation, so he could be back in 3 games, maybe 4 games. But looking at this situation, what do you think is the outlook for the Steelers? Is Broderick Jones and Dan Moore definitely going to be – are they going to definitely be the starting offensive tackles? Or do you think Troy Fautanu has a shot to kind of crack the starting lineup this week?
Now, here's what I think is going to happen in Atlanta. I think it'll be Spencer Anderson at left guard, Dan Moore at left tackle, and Broderick Jones at right tackle. Troy Fautanu was limited in the bonus day on Monday. He went out there and did a little bit of individual work, but he did not do teamwork. So I think it would be a little bit out of character for Mike Tomlin just to give Troy Fautanu Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, after missing 3.5 weeks to boot, to get ready for his first NFL start. Now, Chris, you could look at Isaac Seumalo's injury, and Troy Fautanu can dress if he's healthy enough, because you need bodies on Sunday. They'll probably dress 8 offensive linemen. So I do think if Troy proves this week that, he is good enough to play, that he'll be a backup, but I don't see them starting him this week. I think what we're all looking forward to is when he gets his feet back on the ground and he's ready to go back in, then it becomes, okay, does Broderick sit down or does Dan Moore sit down? That's the question that has to be answered. But for this week, I don't think there's going to be a lot of intrigue. I think it'll be more staying on the left and Jones staying on the right for week 1.
Now, do you think that a lot of this, that future decision of when he is fully, feet on the ground, healthy, ready to go, do you think a lot of that decision is going to get determined by who plays the best in week 1 and maybe week 2 if it goes that long? Because Dan Moore was definitely the best tackle throughout preseason. Granted, he's the most polished, he's the most experienced. But Broderick Jones did have a good, strong performance. But let's say Broderick Jones comes back, his arm is healthy, he's not afraid to throw punches, and he looks good. Is this going to be something that's determined by just simply how these two play in this first game?
Yeah, I mean, usually, Chris, things like this tend to work out on their own. So, we'll see how Dan Moore plays in week 1. Falcons are fairly talented on the outside. He'll have his hands full. Broderick Jones will have his hands full. And I think one of those guys will rise to the top, and maybe it'll be clear by Sunday at 5:00, who it will be, who's going to the bench and who's going to stay in the lineup. Maybe they both play well. Maybe this goes into a second week here. Maybe Troy isn't where we think he is. So a lot can happen between now and Denver. But, the one thing you said was, Dan Moore has the most experience. I think Troy Fautanu is the most polished offensive lineman other than Isaac Seumalo on this football team. So
interesting.
Yeah, I think his technique is really good. There's a reason they elevated him to be a starter. So I think, there's some things to clean up from that Texans game. But once he's ready, I think he's going to be one of the best offensive linemen, if not the best offensive lineman on this football team.
I think that's something that we've talked about a lot. From just seeing him in training camp, the Steelers feel like he is that polished guy there. And listen, this team needs polished guys on the offensive line. They need to fit the guys that can realize their potential sooner rather than later to kind of get where they want to go. Arthur Smith has talked about, all offseason leading up to this. Andy Weidel has talked about Mike Tomlin. They want to be a physical football team. But to be a physical football team, you have to be good up front. And it's not just simply about just power and dominance. It's about technique. It's about making sure your feet are in the right place, your hands are in the right place, your pads are low enough to be able to win those leverage battles. I think the guys like Zach Frazier has shown steady improvement. He's shown that I think that he's ready to go for week one. But Broderick Jones, he struggled at that. And that's a guy who last year I thought was in a really good trajectory for setting up for this year. And granted, again, he's been dealing with injuries. He had an elbow injury that, it looks like, and we've broken down film here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette where his punching power seems to be reduced or non-existent since that injury. But they need this offensive line to be better. I do think that Arthur Smith and the Steelers, the way their offense is constructed right now, they can buy time. They don't need this offensive line to be dominant right away to be able to win football games, but to be a very good offense and a very good team this year, efficient offense. They need this offensive line to figure it out and for guys to be put in their positions. And it makes me wonder, are they misplaying how they're using these tackles? Because you drafted Broderick Jones. He played left tackle in college. He's been playing all right tackle. They drafted Troy Fautanu. He's been playing left tackle all college. They want him at right tackle. And you're doing this for a fourth-round pick in Dan Moore Jr., who a lot of people said was one of the worst starting tackles in the league last year. Now, again, Dan Moore's played well in this preseason. But it just seems like there's a lot of questions and there isn't a clear picture of what will be the offensive line that this team wants to pull out and how it wants to look once everything's all said and done.
Yeah, if fans want to know the number one key for the Steelers to win this game in Atlanta, it's the running game. And I'll tell you why. Why have the Steelers always wanted to replace Dan Moore? It's his issues in pass protection. Okay. Mm-hmm. Broderick Jones on the right side. Why was everybody up in arms about his play? It's because he was a turnstile in pass protection. So if the Steelers cannot run the ball in Atlanta, if we see another game where they have 17 rushes for 42 yards like they put on film for the first half of last season, they're going to lose, Chris, because you don't want to put Russell Wilson in a situation where he's having to pass on second and third and long, not behind this offensive line as is currently construction. Now, hey, maybe when Broderick's on the left side and Troy's on the right side and those guys are comfortable in their new spots, then it's probably going to be a little bit better from a pass pro standpoint. But, just what I know about Dan Moore and just what I've seen from Broderick here this summer, I don't want those guys dropping back, having to pass protect 40, 45 times in this game. And if they do, I'm telling you right now, it's a losing recipe.
Yeah. It's certainly, I think this team was built on that. And if they don't actually become that, it will be a problem. And look, Russell Wilson, I think, can be a good quarterback still in the NFL, but they put him in a balance. An offense that's going to be balanced with the run. They've made this offense about Najee Harris and Jalen Warren and Cordell Patterson using play action to set up off that. If you can't run the ball in the first place, it's a big piece of the foundation that's non-existent, which is why we are talking so much about the offensive line of the Steelers and how it needs to shape up moving forward. But we will keep you up to date with all of that here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo all week long. We still got several days before the Steelers play the Falcons in Atlanta for week one. But there's practice. We get to see injury reports. We'll see that the first official injury report today, where we get to see how guys are practicing, how active is a guy like Troy Fautanu. Also, Roman Wilson, who was said to be back sooner rather than later. How much will he factor into the Steelers' plans, considering he's missed basically all of training camp and preseason? We'll keep you covered with all of that at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Remember, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter and Ray, we'll see you here Friday on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.